Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
The Corver family was not starstruck, but they were not poor either. It was an average intellectual family. The head of the family, Nick Corver, worked as a math teacher at school. His wife, Sophia, worked in the village administration. Corver had a daughter, Helen. They would have been happy to give the girl a brother or sister, but the state of health did not allow Sophia to become a mother. The second time they lived amicably. In the summer, they went to the mountains, to the lake, or campgrounds as a family. And in the cold time, Corver loved to arrange family gatherings together, cooked hot pastries, or own or captive bags under fragrant aromatic tea. All remarks to each other, if any, sounded not at all offensive and were taken rather as jokes. Unlike many teenagers, Helen Corver had only heard firsthand what strained family relationships and parental misunderstandings were like. Whatever happened to her, Helen could always trust her parents and count on their help. In the family reigned love, understanding, and mutual respect. If there was something that marred the happiness of the family, it was the relationship between Nick and his mother-in-law. The situation is anecdotal, except he wouldn't be laughing. Dear Wendy apparently considered it her duty almost every day to visit them and give valuable instructions, or rather to poke her nose into everything in her field of vision. "Why is your porch wobbling?" Looking disapprovingly in the direction of her son-in-law, Wendy said, "What are you in the house for, man? It's like this every time. That the beds are not to dig, that the grass is low, that here to catch a cold." A separate topic was the closet of my wife and daughter. A real man should dress up his women. My mother-in-law insisted. When Sophia saw a beautiful dress on TV and said she wanted the same Nick. "Well, right, honestly, what do you have them wearing?" Helen looked at her tracksuit and shrugged her shoulders. It didn't escape Grandma's eyes. "You're going someplace decent, or else there's nothing to do." Solemnly, Wendy summed it up. "Mom, what do you mean by a decent place?" Sophia grinned. "A theater or a restaurant? We don't go to them." "You should." "Oh, and what though?" "Not in a tracksuit." Sophia is tempted to reply that she and her late father were not regulars at such places either, but she changes her mind. After all, Mom is Mom, and she wants her daughter to have everything she needs for a happy life. And thank God that Nick preferred to keep his mouth shut, for he didn't like conflict. Nick Corver really did not like conflicts, but adored his girls. For their sake, Corver was ready to endure anyone, including squabbling and restless mother-in-law and soft character of Nick Konstantinovich. His relatives noticed it, shook their heads, and expressed their discontent. "Yes, she's just riding you," said Betty, Nick's sister. "Mark my word, it won't end well," and she was right. It all started with Sophia's promotion. Years ago, Sophia, a college graduate, joined the local government. Simply put, she got a job as a secretary. Then she was lucky. The previous secretary was just going on maternity leave. After the position of secretary was removed from the staff schedule, Sophia was not left without a job. She became a specialist and finally reached the position of vice chairman. Her duties have increased, but also the salary became higher. And that's what prompted a new round of attacks. Wendy on Nick, on the occasion of his wife's promotion. And to you, they slaughtered a boar. The women prepared dinner, and after a shower, Corver and their relatives gathered at a generously set table. Alas, at first hearty sit-downs with the easy hand of Wendy turned into a real balaganza. During the family feast, the elderly woman drank too much and she, as they call it, was carried away. "Shame on you," she said. "A woman and like a damned and earns, by the way, more than you." Mom warned me before Sophia started that, "Mom, I'm telling the truth. Can't we deal with this truth on our own? They'll figure it out." "Nick, do you really like your job?" "I like it," my son-in-law answered briefly. "But I like it even more when my wife earns good money." The truth, Wendy continued to stir things up. "God!" exclaimed Helen and grabbed not a single piece of meat pie and a glass of tea, went to her room. "But what's rather reproachful?" Sophia asked her mother. "By the way, Scarlett has a scarlet transitional age, and the girl very painfully perceives your." She could not find the right words and only waved her hand. If there were another person in Wendy's place, he would have realized that he had just spoiled a peaceful family holiday and hurried to smooth over the conflict. But where was it? Strong alcohol plus a quarrelsome temper. A mixture of thermonuclear girl and scandalized. And let the girl know that her daddy is a worthless man. And what makes him worthless, I wonder. Betty obeyed, who didn't mind what she said. She organically did not like her brother's mother-in-law. And the relatives suspected that the fighting woman was just waiting to have a heart-to-heart fight with Wendy. Those present froze in anticipation of not a weak performance and were not at all deceived in their expectations. The women screamed so loud that the dishes rang. "Your brother is a shit and a lowlife," Wendy said. "Yes, my brother is a good man," contended Betty belligerently. "But you're an old schemer for your own life?" "No, you're a meddler in other people's." "What did you say?" Sophia formidably asked the relative, looming over the sister of her hated brother-in-law. But the young woman from the preamble aside and nonchalantly replied that they had heard. Live themselves to live amicably, bring up a daughter, and persuaded Betty. But no. Even on a holiday, there's no peace from you. Mom, but really my son Alexander intervened. You were sitting so well, weren't you? Eggs. Chicken is very thoughtful, threatened mother, and then came to the table, defiantly poured herself a full shot glass of vodka and drank. Didn't blush. Come on. Zatzit Satsia for this is not to give. She continued savoring the crunch of the pickle. Everyone, as one, just sighed heavily. If Wendy Medvedeva had been on her own for a long time. But why does Grandma always cling to Daddy for the umpteenth time? Helen wondered. She, of course, was still quite young, and due to the lack of life experience, still understood little. But she knew one thing about a husband like Nick. They are still to be found. He doesn't drink, helps his mother with the household chores, earns money. What else do you need? The girls sighed heavily. Voices, related from the hall, could not. Actually, it was mostly Wendy's grandmother who spoke. The others did not dare to try to contradict her, but it seems, unsuccessfully. All in all, fun, and so it was every holiday. The pork pie was getting cold and didn't look so appetizing, and I didn't feel like eating. And why do we have everything not like people? Helen thought, we're getting there. And the tea, which also began to cool down. This year, Corver's only daughter was finishing school. She had dreamed of becoming a journalist since 5th grade and was eagerly counting the days until graduation. And then Helen would go to university to study and work as a journalist. The girl imagined interviewing a celebrity. Her heart closed sweetly. God, but why do universities have to study for 5 whole years with a sigh? Helen thought, that's such a long time. She desperately wanted to go to another world where everything is beautiful, cultured, and there are no table scandals. To hell with all of you. Helen heard her grandmother's loud voice and shuddered. Don't listen to me, but in vain. After a while, the voices fell silent. A fuss was heard, and the girl realized with relief that the guests were leaving. When the house was quiet, Helen came out of her room. Her father was sitting in an armchair, obviously thinking hard about something. Don't be mad at Mom, Sophia said, picking up the plates from the table. I'm not. Nick shrugged and sighed, adding, I'm used to it. He looked so lost that Helen wanted to hug her father and say something nice to him, and what, in fact, prevented it. The girl came to Nick and, sitting on the windowsill of the chair, hugged him by the neck. Daddy, I love you very much. With tenderness, said Helen, and added, and you, Mom. I have the coolest parents in the world. Well, we are glad to hear that, Sophia smiled. But to make my joy complete, help me clear the table serving comrade-in-chief, replied the daughter, jokingly saluted. At that moment, all 3 of them were thinking about what a good family they had. But none of them suspected what changes awaited her. Sophia started her new position. Nick continued to sow the reasonable, good, eternal, and indoctrinate young minds with theorems and logarithms. And Helen dreamed of a career as a journalist. It seemed like it would be like that for many years to come. But life arranged otherwise. After a staff meeting in the district administration, Sophia went to a cafe for a snack. She made an order, and having taken a table in a secluded corner of the hall with an appetite, began to eat at You Are Not Busy? With a polite smile, asked a solid man about 50 years old, dressed in a dark gray suit with thin stripes. Sophia shook her head. And you are the new deputy head of the administration of the village, aren't you? The man asked. That's right. Why is it nice to see another spectacular woman in such a responsible position? I forgot what's your name. Sorry, it's just a lot of names, surnames, and patronymics to memorize. Sophia Corver. She introduced herself. Oh, nice to meet you. The man stretched out. Well, I'm the head of citizen services. Thomas Parker. You've heard of him. Sophia nodded with a faint smile. Well, that's great. That day, the colleagues chatted and separated. When an administration employee came in, she knew Parker, of course. When Sophia was a specialist, she traveled to the administration office once a month with a report and sometimes ran into him in the hallway. Parker couldn't help but know Sophia by sight. After all, in so many years of work, everyone had managed to be attracted to each other. However, it had only now come to a personal acquaintance. Sophia had heard from colleagues that Parker was a womanizer. It was common for him to fix a young secretary, which, by the way, periodically changed. At one time, there were rumors that one of the secretaries was forced to resign at the insistence of her husband. It was rumored that one of the secretaries was forced to resign at the insistence of her husband, who had somehow found out that the young wife was having an affair with the head of the Department for Work with Citizens. It seems that Thomas was married twice, and from each wife he had a child. By the way, his first wife, Emily, had a great career in the same system and made it to the regional administration. Sophia had already forgotten about that lunch at the staff meeting because she had so much work to do that she had no time to remember. And what was there to remember? It was just an ordinary business lunch, of which there would be many more. Hello, is Sophia Corver there? She heard a vaguely familiar voice. I'm listening, she answered. Oh, Sophia here. This is Thomas Parker. Remember him? Yes, of course. In a discreet, businesslike manner, Sophia replied. What do you want? I'd like to make an appointment with you in the same formal tone, he said, and felt it necessary to add. A business meeting, of course. Your head is on vacation. On vacation. She confirmed it. Well then, all questions I solve with you as with, and oh, okay. What is it you'd like to discuss with me? Sophia, don't get your hopes up. With a slight chuckle in his voice, Parker replied. We'll talk about it when we meet. I'll see you at 3 p.m. When Sophia went to the reception desk, the receptionist was absent. Strange, she thought, and knocked quietly on the office door. Yes, yes, Sophia heard, a cheerful voice. Parker, and opened the door. Sophia, you've already arrived, he asked, and pointing to a soft chair next to a beautifully shaped magazine table, gallantly spoke, have a seat. I will now. Sophia obediently sat down, and Thomas went into a funny room, which apparently served as a kind of kitchen, and came back with the payment and a bottle of champagne, not cheap, by the way. But there, he smiled. That seems to be it now. What's all this for? Sophia asked, and looking at the table, in the very center stood a small fruitcake, which, as far as she knew, could only be purchased in a restaurant. In addition to the cake, there were caviar cakes on the table, 3 different salads. What for? Thomas smiled broadly. It's a business meeting. I find it easier to solve issues at a set table, so to speak, in a trusting atmosphere. What's cultured and efficient, don't you think? To be honest, I hadn't thought about it, the woman replied with a shrug. She was beginning to realize that a business meeting was out of the question. That was all she needed. Parker said emphatically, even in our backwater, culture is not a bad thing. Can't hurt. Sophia nodded. What do I mean? He rejoiced. And then, when I make an appointment with a beautiful woman, no matter what the occasion, I always prepare for it properly. So what did you want to discuss with me? She took the bull by the horns. She didn't like this business meeting. What if, God forbid, someone found out about it? A lot of things. Sophia replied nonchalantly to the head of the Citizens Affairs Department. For example, about how to raise the standard of living in the neighborhood. And you want to discuss it with me personally, she grinned. Why not? And Parker steered the gas. You live in cubicles, and therefore you know the problems of the village firsthand, don't you? Well, that's just it. Champagne, pouring. And what am I really boring, Sophia thought. After all, a new position is not only new responsibilities, but also new opportunities. There is an opportunity to drink champagne and talk about life with one of the department heads, so I'll make the most of it. How long can I sit in my village and not see the light of day? And if anyone sniffs, I have nothing to be ashamed of. If I don't allow it, it won't happen. I'm not a young secretary. That's the spirit. Approved Parker and poured champagne into glasses. Well, very tasty. With a smile, said a colleague. A nice drink. I love it. I love it too, he nodded. You eat salads. Cake all in the restaurant ordered. Fresh, delicious. Surprisingly, but now the solid head of the department seemed Sophia so simple and homely. Probably that's how his family and friends knew him. It occurred to her, I wonder why he got divorced. And then she was ashamed of her thoughts. Why pry into someone else's life? Shall we do it again? Parker smiled, and not immediately heard Sophia, immersed in his own thoughts. I suggest we do it again. Is it just me, or are you tense? Everything is fine, assured the guest. I will gladly drink more champagne. Sophia, won't you be offended if the second toast is for you? The owner of the office asked not only jokingly, but also seriously. Why should it offend me? She was surprised. I don't know. Well, Thomas, champagne is good, of course. But let's get to why you invited me here. Sophia said in a businesslike tone. Our neighborhood, as you quite rightly pointed out, needs improvement. And when it comes to this particular booth, I have some thoughts. Parker grunted in surprise, but the guest smiled dazzlingly as if she hadn't noticed. We'll discuss it. The dinner was conducted in a strictly businesslike manner. Sophia realized that this was not what Parker was expecting, but there was nothing she could do to please him. He did not hint at a closer acquaintance, for he realized that he would receive a strong rebuff, and for a womanizer like Parker, that was simply unacceptable. It's embarrassing and humiliating. No, it's a gradual thing. Usually a couple of bottles of champagne was enough. I must say, the conversations about improving the standard of living in the neighborhood went well. Thomas listened to Sophia's proposal, and an hour later she called the driver. So soon. Parker stretched out disappointedly. But I guess that's the end of the matter. Corver waved her hands. He wanted to add that he had ordered a sauna, but he stopped talking. I wanted to say that you are absolutely right, smiled charmingly at the person in charge of working with citizens. I will certainly take into account all your wishes and, as they say, let's get to work. When the driver pulled up, Parker escorted Sophia to the car like a true gentleman. He wanted to kiss her hand, but came to his senses in time. Why gossip? It was one thing to spend time with a young and free employee like him, and quite another to spend time with a family woman, the deputy head of the administration. Parker gallantly opened Sophia's doors as the car moved off, admiringly thought this woman. Parker went up to his office, poured champagne, and thought deeply. The head of the department clearly understood this woman. He had a great hookup with his second wife, the same one who had a great career. Thomas had divorced 3 years ago and was no longer eager to remarry. Why should he? He never saw a woman as a free cleaning lady or a cook. But from time to time, he thought there was no need to marry. Parker was clean and, as far as time allowed, did not neglect cleaning. In addition, he was a good cook and knew a dozen interesting recipes for those who do not have time. And lately, Thomas was often ordering food from a restaurant. That's funny. What about the automatic washing machine? For what? Well, as for natural male needs, women who are ready for anything have not yet outlived someone, and serious status did not stop someone, not to mention young secretaries. Those, however, had their own interest in advancing their careers. But here Parker had an iron principle: he never made patronage to any of his own for chills. Have you tried studying? Lovely ladies. Parker had a daughter growing up from his second marriage. If he suddenly found out that Mila was trying to make a career through bed, she would be in trouble. He'd known Sophia Corver for a long time, but he'd hardly ever crossed paths with her. They used to say hello in the corridor of the district administration. Sophia was a good-looking woman back then. But he had plenty of that goodness, and he had plenty of that goodness. Thomas Parker knew perfectly well that he was considered a womanizer and did not deny it. But the people around him were wrong about something. Parker did not chase every skirt. Some quite pretty women didn't stand a chance. He didn't like or recognize vulgar and mercantile individuals at first sight. Young duck secrets didn't count. After all, youth and freshness are beyond competition. When Sophia was appointed deputy chairman of the village council, he considered it the right decision. Corver was not only an attractive woman, but also a conscientious worker and undoubtedly deserved the promotion. And after socializing with Corver, he appreciated her in every way. Suddenly, Parker thought that with such a woman I would like to live the rest of my life. And was surprised to think, what about his love of order? A culinary talent, a car, a machine, and a bunch of ladies for lovemaking. It's an interesting question, of course. The head of the Citizens Department suddenly laughed. To think he had been discovered, but not quite discovered. But for the first time in his life, a meeting with a woman had not gone according to the Parker's scenario. And yet, despite this unfortunate circumstance, the mood was great. He'd enjoyed himself, and that was worth a lot. And as for the rest, well, as they say, there's bad luck for old men. And then Thomas Parker is not used to giving up without a fight. The more difficult the task, the more interesting it is. The head of the department drank champagne and ate cake. And looking at his watch, he called the driver. "Would you be so kind as to sign this?" He said, "The traffic will start soon, and I'm tired as a dog." "Okay, Thomas. And your application is accepted and will be considered within 3 working days," said Sophia to another visitor. "Goodbye, goodbye," replied pensioner Frank. Sophia's head had been spinning all day since that private business meeting at the district administration a week had passed. Memories of it made Sophia smile. The man had spent on the road, champagne and hors d'oeuvres from the restaurant. And she was proud. What's pride got to do with it? She and Parker were in a purely working relationship, and she didn't think of anything else. And if that was the case, she should have made it clear to him right away. Sophia was sure that in a few days the head of the Citizens Affairs Department would forget about her. And he should have. "Sophia, the specialist Jenna told you this," and brought a small, pretty basket of blood roses into her office. "Thank you, Jenna," she nodded. Sophia already knew who the flowers were from. She felt uneasy. She had no idea how to react, and that made her feel uncomfortable. But at least I can call and say thank you, Sophia thought. "Glad you liked it," Parker replied. And there was a smile in his voice. There was an awkward silence. Sophia broke the silence. "Yes. And it would not be impertinent of me to invite you to dinner at the restaurant." "Thomas, I don't think it's necessary," Sophia replied firmly. "But why don't you really understand?" "I confess I don't. I'm a married woman. I'm in a position of authority and everything. And you, Thomas, have a tarnished reputation." He smirked. "In other words, a reputation as a womanizer." "Right. But I didn't say that," Sophia grinned back. "You don't have to say anything." "Sophia, it's just dinner." Parker didn't give up. She asked ironically. Of course, Thomas didn't hesitate. How could it not be? Suddenly, Sophia realized that she wanted to go to a restaurant. It seemed to her that she had recently fulfilled the norm of her former working life. So why not have a little celebration? I think I'd agree," Sophia said. True, Parker sounded genuinely happy. She thought again that the head of the Citizens Affairs Department, whom the neighborhood knows, and the one who was talking to her at that moment were 2 different people. "Yes," Sophia replied discreetly. Wonderfully received, Parker. Businesslike tone. "My driver will pick you up for bed at 5, she asked fearfully. "Yeah, what's the big deal? What time do I get home?" "Oh, Sophia," the colleague laughed. "You probably haven't heard anything yet. He has irregular working days, which is a common thing in your position. A working moment. Yes, only there's something else." "There's nothing." Sophia wanted to say that she didn't have the right dress, but thought it was unnecessary. In Sophia's opinion, a man shouldn't know about such things. She walked over to the large full-length mirror hanging in the study. What exactly is wrong with the suit? She thought. A dark blue pantsuit, intricate trim on the lapel and cuffs of the jacket. It looked very impressive. I wish I had a little more makeup and jewelry. You can do without it. The gold trim looks pretty flashy. And I think there was an elegant and wide-brimmed hat in the closet. Sophia bought it recently, but never brought it home. But here it is ready to cheer up the evening ensemble, she thought. There is only one thing left to settle Nick. I will be late tonight, Sophia told her husband. Suddenly she felt like a schoolgirl. And what are these trips? Cindy, the accountant, looked out of the window. But what's not to be clear about, snickered Jenna, escaping to the tea party hat flowers. A driver at the end of the day. And you think about it. Really? The elderly accountant gasped. And I thought she was decent. She has such a good husband. A daughter. Well, give a man a diplomat, and he'll show his true colors. And everyone knows what goes on upstairs. They're all related, for God's sake, the specialist ranted. But our doggy's got it. That's right, the accountant nodded. Well, and then the sight of the little one, it seems, did not go in vain. After all, she's always oppressed Nick. Here is the result. Yes, Cindy sighed. And what a nice family they were, weren't they? Every dog in the stalls knew about the relationship between the math teacher and his mother-in-law. Moreover, it was one of the most discussed topics in the store, in the nurse's station, and of course, in the village administration. Well, now Sophia's colleagues had something to discuss. And in the light of recent events, it looked a little spicy. Cindy, please. Jenna rolled her eyes. Why worry about them? Nick, if anything, who will be there to comfort them. Everyone knows the vice principal's got a crush on him. Molly's a very attractive woman, by the way. Not like our duck. Yeah, it's like Santa Barbara all over again. The women laughed merrily and continued to grind the bones of the deputy head and the rest of the villagers. Sophia, I'm speechless. Parker exclaimed. I didn't mince words. Are you charming? Thank you, she smiled. What's the harm in that? It was a pleasure. But at the same time, a strange uneasiness settled in her soul. Maybe it was a premonition. What will you have to drink? Thomas asked. At your discretion? To be honest, I don't know much about wine. Then I'd recommend a Spanish wine, very bright, very tasty. Well then, let's have the Spanish wine. Sophia nodded. They drank the wine, which indeed turned out to be amazingly tasty. Ate shish kebab of sturgeon with spicy sweet sauce, and talked about everything in the world. Parker proved to be an interesting conversationalist, and the time flew by in a flash. My God, it was already 9:30. Sophia gasped, looking at her watch. They'll be worried at home. Thomas nodded understandingly. Well, of course, she replied and went to her purse for her phone. Where the hell did it go? Sophia cheerfully turned to her colleague. Wait a minute. Sophia waved Sophia away with annoyance, intending to dump the contents of her purse on the table. Sophia mockingly held out Parker. I apologize profusely for interrupting what appears to be a fascinating pastime, but maybe you're looking for this. He pointed with a smile to Sophia's cell phone lying on the table. And both of them, without conspiring, spluttered. Cheerfully, she said, Husband, you have not lost me. Well, great, I'll be there soon. Love you. Parker felt a prick of jealousy and sadly stated, well, I guess the banquet is over. Sophia waved her hands. It can't be helped. They're waiting for me at home. Well, if they are, when she entered the house, her husband was awake. Have you been drinking? Nick asked, looking at her intently. I had a drink, Sophia nodded. There was a small banquet after the administration meeting. Something was wrong. Was it Nick's imagination, or was there a challenge in his wife's last sentence? Why not? He shrugged. You're entitled. You weren't brought here under the arm. Yeah, the wife muttered. I'm sorry. I'm tired. Let's go to bed. The New Year's Eve corporate party for employees of the administration was prepared on a grand scale. A newly opened restaurant was engaged for this purpose. The conversations of the administration staff were all on the same topic. Ladies' outfits I have already looked through long, revealing with a cut to the thigh. But you're not wearing that kind of fire, not at my size. Oh, come on. It's not a problem. Put on a high-waisted dress and you'll be happy. You'll look slimmer and prettier, and you'll show off your legs. I want to wear red, but I don't know if it's appropriate. Girls, whose year is this? Secretaries, accountants, specialists, and higher-ranking employees resembled schoolgirls on the eve of a party. And it was a very pretty sight. Sophia, like her coworkers, was also racking her brains over what kind of outfit to buy to make everyone aha. Come on, mentally under the case, but on herself, so everyone. After that dinner at the restaurant, Sophia felt something had changed. She didn't know what it was yet, but it was obvious. And then there was that stare from Nick. Did he suspect something? There was nothing to suspect. She and Parker never saw each other again, since they were both busy with work on New Year's Eve. And yet, on Sunday, Sophia went into town to pick up her mom's dress. Well, that's so last century, Helen remarked. When the mother voiced her plans, that is, did not understand Sophia. So now everyone orders in online stores, right? Explained the girl. Yes, but what about trying it on? So it can be done at the point of delivery. Maybe, Sophia grinned. But I'm used to the old-fashioned way. You should. I will keep up with the times, she smiled and went outside. The weather was fantastic. It was warm and the snow was falling quietly. I wish we had this kind of weather at Christmas, Sophia thought dreamily and frowned. Most of the time the holidays were a challenge to her psyche. As usual, her mom would show up and start bad-mouthing Nick. What the hell? Rarely, very rarely without that cataclysm. Sophia suddenly pictured Parker in Nick's place and wondered, I wonder what kind of relationship they'd have with Mom. And the woman sighed heavily. She'd been thinking about him a lot lately. What was that about? Sophia reached the bus stop and said hello to her fellow villagers. The retired headmistress said hello and looked at her strangely. Some of the people standing at the bus stop followed her example, and Sophia felt naked. What are they looking at? 5 minutes later, Sophia's bus pulled up. Please come in, Will said kindly. A student visiting his parents for the weekend. Thank you, Will. She smiled gratefully at the guy and suddenly heard someone murmur. Tell me, please, what honors? Sophia could have been mistaken, of course, but the voice seemed to belong to Anna, Betty's friend. She had sat with Anna more than once at the same table with relatives. Sophia had always thought that Betty's friend was quite nice to her. So what's the matter? There were those looks too. Sophia took her seat and decided to keep her head down. It was no secret to her that her appointment to a new position was received ambiguously by the people. Many were genuinely happy for Sophia, noting that but she deserved the promotion. But not without detractors. God only knows what they argued their discontent. But the fact remained that there were such people. But was it worth paying attention to them? You can't please everyone philosophically, Sophia summed up. For shopping, she chose a hypermarket 2 stops away from the bus station. The market was definitely not suitable for this purpose. Sophia walked through the boutiques. Her eyes were dazzled by the variety of colors and styles. The woman stopped at a marvelously beautiful evening dress, a relay of color and rice. It would go perfectly with her dark Russian hair and gray eyes. The dress cost more than half her paycheck, but it was so beautiful. And if you pictured it with newly bought shoes, clutch sharpening, and beautiful makeup, it was fire. To take it or not to take it? That was the question. Mentally paraphrased Sophia of the famous writer Sophia. She heard a painfully familiar voice, and that was the meeting. In front of her stood none other than Parker. Hello, confused woman said. What are you doing here? Having fun? Thomas asked. I'm just picking out a dress for corporate events. A necessary thing, he approved. How's that going? I haven't picked anything out yet, Sophia admitted. Why not? It's just something. I think this purple one is really nice, Parker said in a businesslike tone, and looking at the dress she was looking at. I think Sophia thought dejectedly too. But for the money it costs, you could live on it for almost a month. You know what? Why don't I give you this dress? Thomas suggested as if he were buying a candy bar. What did the coworker fearfully ask? No, that's out of the question. But I can see you like it. You don't, he said. Do you like it? Nodded Sophia. But it's very expensive. No, Thomas, I can't accept such a gift, she said firmly. No more than money. Parker wouldn't give up. Well, I can't take no for an answer. I need a hint. As if out of nowhere, a young salesgirl materialized. No. Sophia shook her head, stuttering with excitement. But her unexpected companion unhesitatingly declared and to tell, and to show, and it would be good to help to decide on the accompanying goods. Well, there are handbags, shoes. In general, you know yourself. And now the lady wants to try on this dress. The sales consultant looked questioningly at Sophia, and she nodded. She was already convinced that Parker knew how to insist. So was it really worth it? Grabbing her dress, Sophia left, for example. And when the colleague came out, he was speechless. Sophia, I'm blown away, Parker said. Is it really so terrible? She smiled. It's not. Just awful. Terrible, beautiful. No, it's a stunning dress. It really looks like it's made on you, the saleswoman said with a smile. I want to offer you these shoes. The girl took out of the box silk, lilac, pink shoes, decorated with bows with decorations. We'll take them from you too. Without giving Sophia a second thought, Thomas said, and you need a treasure too. So Sophia became the happy owner of dress shoes and elegant treasure. Reshed his fancy shimmer and crystals. Parker pulled out his credit card, and despite Sophia's protests, Sophia paid up. So uncomfortable, she slipped in pitifully. Uncomfortable, Thomas interjected. He looked at her strangely. Yeah, and if I offered to take you home in my car, that would be awkward too. And you want to suggest it, said Sophia in a thin voice, and not just suggest it. Parker nodded and added, I'll insist. And not just suggest it. Parker nodded and added, I will insist. Then you better say yes right away, she grinned, determined to pay him back for all this splendor at the first opportunity. Right. The colleagues left the hypermarket, not realizing that she was watching them. Cinderella's friend Sophia. Here is my carriage, Thomas said proudly, opening the door. Parker drove a dark cherry-colored Ford. The car looked brand new. He added, as if reading Sophia's mind, It's beautiful. I like it too, Parker nodded and sighed, asking Sophia, Don't you think something is happening to us? Actually, she didn't think there was anything going on with them. But Sophia was more worried about something else. What to do about it, I don't know, she said quietly. Not true, Parker whispered. Leaning toward Sophia, he gently took the woman's chin and looked into her eyes as if asking her something. Sophia covered her eyes for a moment, as if answering him yes, and in just a second, they broke. Oh, like schoolboys, Parker laughed a few minutes later, and Sophia was in complete agreement with him. Now she felt like a schoolgirl who had kissed for the first time in her life, and now she was afraid that her mom would find out and scold her. Except that it was not only about mom, but also about her husband and daughter. It was about them first of all, though it's unlikely the mom is either. Wendy, despite the contrast with Nick, would approve of her daughter's behavior. And so it was when Parker brought Sophia home. Her husband wasn't with her daughter. That was good for her. It was embarrassing to face them. And the next day, it seemed that everyone in the village knew that Sophia Corver had come home with some guy in a car. She was sitting in her office drinking coffee when her mother called. What the hell are you doing? Going off the deep end? Wendy's on a roll. So Sophia thought doomfully. I think it's starting. If until yesterday she had nothing to hide, now the situation had changed. It's not proper for a married woman to make out in a car with her face. However, it's all yours too. Good morning, Mom, Sophia said calmly. And you are sure that it is good, gargled, and the mother of the whole village only says that you were brought yesterday by car. Well, what's criminal about it? She asked in a friendly manner. What's criminal about it? Yelled Wendy. So the daughter took the phone away from her ear to ride in a car with someone else's man. That sounds normal to you? Mom slowed down and said, Sophia, riding around with another man's man. Maybe it's not normal. Only I did not ride, and came home with a colleague whom I met in the city and who bought you a dress and shoes." Mother interrupted me. "Aren't you ashamed to accept gifts from a man? It makes things more complicated." "It's a loan," she said. The first thing that came to mind, a loan. The old woman asked incredulously. "Yeah, I haven't heard anything about a paycheck yet. And we have a corporate party in 3 days." Sophia lied inspirationally. "We're going to a new restaurant. We're going out with the district administration. So you have to be on your best behavior." "What did I tell you? Your husband doesn't know how to make money. Do you need to be on top of your game right now? And not just at the New Year's Eve party. Why don't you come to the party? It would have been a dime a dozen." "Mom, what's the point of this?" She sighed tiredly. "You know what time he comes?" "Oh, it's been a long time." With annoyance, said Wendy. "I wish you well. Do you? What's in it for me? What do you want?" "I want you to get your husband up to look for a part-time job, or better yet, another job." Sophia laughed, glad that the conversation had moved on to a less sensitive topic. "And where is she in the village?" "That's another job. If only to become a laborer." "You could start your own business," he grumbled. "After all, he's a mathematician. Just knowing math isn't enough. You need an entrepreneurial spirit. And I don't have one." She summed it up triumphantly. What did she have to prove? "You got a worthless man." "Mom, let's figure out our family life on our own sometime." "For probably the 1,000th time," Sophia said. "And anyway, I have to work. So bye." And in the evening, she had a talk with her husband. "Sophia, while Helen is out walking, we need to talk." He didn't waste time with the preface. "Well, we need to, then we need to." "I agree," Sophia nodded, realizing what the conversation would be about. Nick had been ready for a serious conversation since morning, and now he didn't know how to start. Not sure where to start. She assumed, "And I'll get you a paper. You heard that idiotic rumor that I got a ride home from some guy in a foreign car. And now you want to hold me accountable." "Why would you want to hold me accountable?" Peacefully hummed husband. "I just want to understand the situation and understand. We're still a family. Sophia, I've always been honest with you, so I think I can expect the same." "Yes, of course," Sophia nodded. "But I have nothing to repent of. I always thought you were above gossip. I was wrong. And I can't have this conversation," Nick said thoughtfully. And his wife thought that he was probably right. "What's the point of talking about it?" "Nick, there's nothing to talk about," she exclaimed. "He had a ride. I don't deny it. But it wasn't some guy, it was a colleague, the head of the Citizens Affairs Department. I met him by chance at the hypermarket. And he drove me home. That's it. So he went to the village on purpose to take you home." Nick squinted incredulously. "And before that he bought himself an expensive dress and something to go with it." The situation is more serious than Sophia realized. I wonder how much she'll find out later. What if Nick got wind of that kiss in the car? Desperate, she thought to Dawn. The windows were tinted, and the car was far from the parking lot, but still. And who the hell was following me? Sophia ordered herself to be calm. If anyone knew about that kiss, her mother would have mentioned it. Wendy's daughter had kept silent about it. Anyway, calm is only calm. "Oh, you know so much," Sophia shook her head. "But since you have an informant, he should have reported to you that my mysterious admirer bought me this dress on credit." "On credit?" "Yeah, why are you surprised?" "Well, what if you hadn't met him?" "Nick, you should be an interrogator," grinned the wife. "If I hadn't met him, I would have bought a cheaper dress or called someone. There'd be more questions." "Sorry, crushed," muttered Nick. Sophia walked over to her husband and stroked his hair. With a smile, she said, "Let's just forget about it. And let it be the worst thing that happened to us." "I agree," he smiled back and intercepted his wife's hand and kissed it. "I see you have peace, friendship, love," cheerfully said the daughter who came in. "Did you expect us to fight here?" Her mother asked with a grin. "No," Helen shook her head. "It's just nice to see once again that the parents are doing well." The girl undressed and went to her room. "I heard what she said," Sophia said quietly, "so we'll try to fit in." With tenderness, said her husband. Sophia tried her best to fit in and seemed to succeed. She ignored the general message for the entire 3 days, remaining before the corporate party at the restaurant. Parker, the trips to the district administration with Sophia was entrusted to Jenna, arguing that she was busy, which, however, was true. She answered his calls dryly and one syllable, letting him know that they could only have a business relationship and nothing more. And after the new year, the head will come out of vacation, and everything will be back to normal. Good, Sophia thought with relief. It didn't cost me anything. That's just it. The restaurant, where the corporate party was held, had been opened recently, so it looked untouched and somehow uninhabited. Perhaps it was the high-tech style of the place. Sophia suddenly felt like a snow queen in her ice kingdom. Not to give away, only she guessed that the gossip about her and Parker came from the native village council. And now the co-workers were clearly eager for it to continue. Sophia decided she would not give them that pleasure. She kept talking about her work, had fun, danced, enjoyed delicious food and drinks, and did not give away her desire to approach Parker, and ideally to torture herself with him, and repeat that kiss again and again. "May I invite you gallantly," gave her his hand. Michael, the head of the agriculture department, and Sophia nodded with a smile. Tonight was going to be fun, and Sophia was having fun. She settled into her seat and found herself a cold soda. And 5 minutes later, a security officer came up to her and asked her to dance as well. "Our Sophia is a real hot commodity," commented Cindy, the accountant. "And Parker is not without tears." Her assistant Nina chuckled. The head of the Citizens Affairs Department poured one drink after another, and from time to time cast hateful glances at Sophia. And when the security officer, as befitted a true gentleman, escorted the lady to her seat at the table, Parker approached her with a firm step. The audience froze in anticipation of a dance performance. With forbidding language, he suggested Sophia. "Thomas, are you sure?" She said with a polite smile. "Maybe you should sit down. I decide what's best for me." Parker said, "But we're on a first-name basis." "No," Sophia blurted out, and the almost inferior crowd perked their ears at you. "Thomas, what are you doing?" Michael tried to defuse the situation. It's okay. Who doesn't? A man's had a little too much to drink. It's just an everyday thing. Let's call a cab. But who has a cell phone nearby?" An administration employee from a neighboring village readily took out a phone from her purse and started dialing the number of the cab service, and Michael felt it necessary to warn. And without any stupid woman's gossip, I'll rip my tongue out myself. To say the audience was disappointed was to say nothing. The cab arrived 5 minutes later. Parker was escorted to the car and the fun continued. Sophia could physically feel the stares of her colleagues, and after a while she hurriedly turned away, citing a headache. The next day, Parker sent Sophia a message apologizing for her behavior. Apology accepted. Happy New Year. Was it written? Christmas was spent alone with Nick. Wendy went to a sanatorium on a voucher for pensioners, and Helen, having met Christmas and scared in a salad, went to celebrate the holiday in the company of classmates. "You know," said Nick, "I've wanted to celebrate Christmas with you for a long time. But there's always someone else around." Sophia said cheerfully, "Or someone will show up." That New Year's Eve, the Corver couple felt young and hopeful for the first time in a long time. They chatted merrily and had a delicious meal. Ice-cold champagne they recalled carefree youth, the time of the courtship, the wedding, the news of the long-awaited addition to the family, the birth. Knees? Yeah, it was great. Sophia smiled as she sipped her champagne. "Do you remember how you gave me cosmetics and golden balls?" "You bet I do." Her husband laughed. "It was you from Grandma's paratrooper." "Oh, and hit me then." And the old lady, by the way, had a heavy hand. That night, nobody came to see them. Sophia guessed why. But she didn't care about that now. Let them watch their families. Sophia thought, falling asleep in Nick's arms. "I have the coolest husband in the world, and we have a wonderful daughter. The New Year's holidays are relaxing after all." Sophia tried to concentrate on her work, but it was not going well. The same thing seemed to be happening with the other employees. She went to Paulina's office and, with annoyance, noting that she was not there, went to the accounting department. And so it was. together with Irina and Veronica again. They're washing someone's bones, Jenna. I asked you to prepare the certificates this morning, said Sophia. Where are they? I'm leaving in 10 minutes. Are you? Are you going to sign for me? Jenna reluctantly got up and went to her office. And the deputy manager saw the car and left. I'll be there soon. When Sophia entered the agriculture department, she ran into Parker there. Oh, Sophia, in my honor, he smiled. How are you? How was the holidays? Thank you. All good. Choppy, Sophia replied. Excuse me. I have to go. Yeah, sure, we'll talk again. Thomas sounded a little too meaningful. She soon realized what the tone meant. The agricultural department in Sofia informed her that she was to be sent to the regional center. For how long? She asked. For 24 hours, answered the head of the department. You will get your daily allowance in the accounting department and come straight to me. Okay, Sophia nodded and left the office. I guess you already know. Thomas entered the office with a smile. What do you mean? And business trips, of course, he shrugged. When Sophia returned to the agricultural department, she learned that she was traveling with Parker. She was terribly tempted to refuse. But under what sauce would she do it? And then, if she refused, it would give the department head some interesting ideas. And Sophia wouldn't want that. She's had enough of the New Year's Eve party. Surely the cuckoos, despite the warnings, were already scratching their tongues. Sophia went on a business trip with Parker. This trip was the beginning of their passionate affair. Both realized there was no point in hiding your feelings under lock and key. And be honest, was this trip in your prayers? Sophia asked, snuggling into his shoulder. But what was I supposed to do? Thomas sighed, pretending to sigh. You were avoiding me. And then there was that stupid corporate party. Drunk like an idiot. Wanted a bloody. What's going to happen now? She said thoughtfully. And everything depends on us. I want to be with you if you become my wife. Then the gossips won't dare say a word. Well, that's true. But Nick? What about Nick? Isn't Nick a little boy who'll get over it? He's not old yet. He'll find someone else. You just shook your head. Sophia. Oh, sweetheart. I've been divorced twice. And as a person with experience, I can say that there's really nothing terrible about it. It's more of a people thing. To me, it's really simple. If the marriage has come to an end, there is no point in saving it, and it is better to try to become happy again. And if there's someone you want to be with, then God knows what to do. You're probably right, she agreed. But you see, I don't have that experience, and it's really hard and uncomfortable for me. I understand, with sympathy, Parker said. Helen is graduating from high school this year, Sophia continued. She's looking forward to graduation and having her mom and dad present together. They are together, being divorced. No, Jen, I'm not ready to make that decision yet. You don't have to, he smiled. Just to be near. And there, as they say, there will be a day, there will be food. Thank you for what? For understanding. Believe me, it's not easy for me, Thomas sighed. But I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. A year passed. On Helen's birthday, all the relatives gathered at the Corver house. If Betty held a grudge against her brother, she prudently kept it to herself. She had come to congratulate her niece, and everything else was none of her business except the relatives and closest family friends. The party was attended by half of her classmates, the celebrant, and 2 friends from the university she had safely entered. Nick and Sophia were only too happy to welcome their daughter's new friends into their hospitable home. From the outside, everything looked the same as before, but only externally. Sophia, I was still seeing Thomas, and every day he got more and more insistent that she should divorce Nick and live with him one day. Parker said, I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of this conspiracy. What could she say? Sophia was even worse for leading a double life for a year. What kind of nerves do you have to have? Except that sometimes it seemed to Eugenia that it was easier and easier for her. Sophia exclaimed in amazement when the lover voiced it. Do you think I should lie to the man I love in my own way? Yes, I do. At least as the father of my daughter, it's easier. You think so highly of me. That's when they had their first fight. Thomas apologized for a long time. Her heart shook. Then followed a rather long conversation, during which Sophia decided to tell her husband about the divorce when Lunk turned 18. And so that day came, and Sophia realized with annoyance that she couldn't decide to tell Nick about the divorce. "Sophia, but no one pulled you by the tongue," Parker pointed out. "Did you make this decision on your own? I don't want to pressure you in any way. But if you don't do what you said you'd do, I'll start thinking that you don't know how to keep your word." "You're right," she said, "but I need a little time." "How much time is a little time?" Thomas squinted. "Zen, but we're not in a market." All right. He held up his hands as if in surrender. "All right, I'll wait a little longer. I don't know what you're waiting for," Kate, who worked in the registry office, said perplexed. The women had become friends over the year, and Kate was the only person who knew the details of their relationship. She was Thomas's childhood friend, by the way. Sophia was jealous at first, but then she realized there was nothing to fear. If Kate and Thomas didn't have an affair when they were young or even when they were older, it was unlikely to happen at all. "What are you waiting for?" she repeated. "You love him. He loves you. So what's the problem? Thousands of couples marry and divorce. So you're not the first, you're not the last." "Nick, that's a shame." "What about Helen?" Sophia shook her head at her friend. "Do you feel sorry for everyone? But the farther into the forest, the more wood. If you want to know, I've never seen Thomas like that. For him, relationships with women have always been a kind of sporting competition. Really, every woman was like a victory for him. And with you, everything changed and Sophia made up her mind. "Nick, we need to talk," she said. Her heart was beating like crazy, but there was nowhere to retreat to. At that moment, Nick was feeling the same thing. All this time, he was subconsciously waiting for this conversation. After all, he didn't live on Mars. However, deep down, Nick hoped that it was just an affair. Sonia will outweigh it, and everything will be the same. Turns out, no. "Nick, I'm not gonna beat around the bush." "Yeah, around. I'm leaving." Sophia suddenly felt a weight lifted off her shoulders. Wow, turns out this isn't scary at all. What was I expecting? I can't say I'm happy. But now that you've made up your mind. Nick, you're a wonderful you. Oh, don't do that, he wrinkled his nose. As they say, here's God. And here's the threshold, and there's nothing more to talk about. I'm going tomorrow. Not believing her happiness, said Sophia. As you wish. The next day, she moved into town to Parker's house. Come in, he fussed. We're going to celebrate. I'm not divorced yet. Sophia laughed, but it's only a matter of time. Thomas's apartment was spacious and bright, and looked nothing like a bachelor pad. Everything has been meticulously cleaned, interior cut. The work of a top-notch designer. Please, the host pointed toward the hall, where Sophia was waiting for a sumptuously set table. In the very center stood a goose with apples, and there was an Olivier salad, a salad of shrimp, avocado, and egg bindings with a creamy seafood assortment sauce. Miniature chocolate cakes with whipped cream. What restaurant did you order from? Sophia asked. What restaurant? Pretend. Thomas was indignant. With the exception of the cakes, I made everything myself. My favorite woman moved in. Good girl. She smiled and kissed him on the cheek. So what are we waiting for? I'm hungry like a wolf. What will you have? Wine, cognac, champagne. Well, I'll have a whiskey, said Parker, and the lovers began their meal. How delicious, Sophia said with admiration, tasting the sleeve salad. It's from Italian cuisine. I like it very much too. Do you know what my dream is? Asked Thomas after the second toast, which was to love. And what's that? To meet your daughter. Sophia's soul was singing. Today she called Helen and informed her of the impending divorce. To her great relief, her daughter was very understanding. I'll introduce you, Sophia promised. For the second time in the last 24 hours, she was surprised at how simple everything was. But unfortunately, it wasn't. After the divorce, Nick became addicted to alcohol. At first, he'd have a drink or two after work. But as time went on, things took a serious turn. One day, Nick showed up at school with a bad hangover, for which he was sharply reprimanded by the principal. The mathematician apologized and said it wouldn't happen again. Kelly, he's not really drunk. The vice principal stood up for him. At least the man had some drama in his personal life. Who doesn't? The principal grinned. Even for students was not a secret that Molly has long been unevenly breathing to the math teacher. And here was such an opportunity to win the man of her dreams. And to say the vice principal had been a widow for 6 years. All right, Kelly relented. On your, Molly, responsibility. But if this happens again, I'm gonna have to talk to you differently, Nick. I hope you understand what I mean. I do, replied the mathematician briefly. Well and good. Let's get on with our work. The incident never happened again. And a couple of months later, after a corporate birthday party, they decided to continue the banquet at Nick's. The cell phone was ringing off the hook, and Alex, the gym teacher, exclaimed in anger, "Yours, that's the one." With annoyance nodded Alex. So calmed down. To hell with her. Alex, you're 100% wrong, said Nick. Do you know what this is called? What do we have? We don't keep it when we lose it. Oh, poor or what? Colleagues drank a shot each, and the gym teacher remarked, but freedom. Fuck that freedom. Nick said with tears in his voice. When I see Sofiaka coming to work with his whip, I'm ready to kill him. And why him? Alex grinned. There, I think your mother-in-law did her best, and ours was talking to the whole village about how worthless he was. But apparently her words fell on fertile ground. The coworker left, and Nick continued his outpourings in proud solitude. Alex's words about his mother-in-law's contribution to the divorce did not go out of his head, and he went to his ex-mother-in-law's house drunk and made a scandal. It's all your fault, you old witch, he yelled, flashing his eyes. Why? Wendy said nonchalantly. 3, you always said I was worthless. That said, confirmed the older woman. Wasn't she? And Nick couldn't keep a woman. So it's the mother-in-law's fault. Well done. I'm you old witch, threateningly said the former son-in-law and approached Wendy. Help, they're killing me. She paid with a voice not her own and ran out of the house. Nick, what are you doing? Shouted Betty, who came over. The neighbor told her that a drunken Nick had gone to his ex-mother-in-law's house. And the woman followed, just as long as he didn't do anything. I'll get her now, yelled the math teacher. I'll go to the district police officer. The old woman continued to yell, and such a person teaches children at school. Ah, disgusting. Fucking alcoholic. You can be sure I won't let it go. Wendy, honey, I'm so sorry, for God's sake. Betty begged her tearfully. You understand. I'll get on my knees to you, but don't go to the police station. To hell with you. The old woman came in with her and, cautiously squinting at her brother-in-law, went into the house, and Betty took her brother home, exhorting him that life doesn't end after divorce. I love her. Nick interjected to his sister. You know I love her. Betty just sighed heavily and thought, and they say women are stupid. A few days later, the story reached the education department, and the question of firing the mathematician arose. Colleagues were divided into those who argued that such behavior is completely unacceptable for a teacher and those who supported Nick. By the way, Sophia, feeling guilty before the former spouse, stood up in his defense. She tried by all means to persuade the education officer not to use such drastic measures. But alas, as a result, Nick was left without a job. He'll be lost, Sophia lamented. Don't exaggerate, replied Thomas. After all, he is a grown man, an intellectual. I think he will pull himself together in time. Oh, I don't know. I sighed. You know what she was thinking. Just promise me you won't take it personally. I get scared when you talk like that, Parker admitted. Yes, and it's really not a big deal. Anyway, maybe it makes sense to postpone the wedding. Why would I do that? I don't see any joy in that. Sophia's on. Yeah, I've been living like a hot frying pan. I'm probably the only lazy person who doesn't say behind my back, I've driven a man crazy. And they don't give a rat's ass about me trying to help him. And I still got a job to do, by the way. Well, the job isn't exactly a problem, Thomas said. There's a specialist in the civil registry office about to retire. Why? Will you look for a good option and work? Kate didn't tell me anything about that, she wondered. But you would. When was the last time you saw each other? About a couple weeks ago, Sophia recalled. But you see, the position's only been open for a week. I think we should hold off on the wedding after all. But think about it. Nick is in this situation, and I'm getting married. And you're like salt in the wound. Zen, but after all, we're living together. Well, okay, whatever you say, Harker gave in. In the end, they decided to postpone the wedding for a month. Nick felt empty and cold. His parents had passed away one by one many years ago. The wife he loved and idolized had left him for someone else. The daughter was studying to be a journalist in a regional city, and Nick was clear that Helen would not return to her native village. What with her profession here to do? With a sigh, he thought, except to visit. And now he didn't have a job either. Nick called his daughter almost every day, and Helen supported her father as best she could. She said that the divorce was not the end of life, and that Nick would still find happiness. In general, everything they usually say in such cases. If you want to come to my place, the daughter said. I'm working part-time now and renting an apartment. No, really, the only other person who supported him in any way was his sister Betty. You should come more often, she said. Why do you have to sit alone? Nick nodded uncertainly. What? Yeah, shouted the sister. Have you eaten at all today? I don't remember. He doesn't remember. But he remembered to get a bottle. Nick, but what are you turning into? The woman said in despair. Listen, why don't you stay with us? You'll come to your senses, and then we'll see what to do with you. Maybe we can find you a job. And Nick, Betty, he said quietly. Leave me alone. I'm sick enough as it is. The sister thought for a moment and walked out with a sigh. She walked home and thought about how easy it was to break something that had taken years to build up. Unlike her friend Anna, Betty was far from judging her former sister-in-law. But how painful it was to see past and washed-up addition Sophia while Nick trivialized. Betty approached the house and saw Anna sitting on a bench. Hi, her friend said with a smile. I'm here to see you. Well, hello, sighed Betty and invited Anna into the house. The women came into the kitchen and the hostess offered them tea. What tea is there? Betty waved it off. There's a lot going on here. And how can it be without special interest? Betty asked. Frankly speaking, she had enough of what was going on in their family. I heard the latest news was righteous anger, exclaimed Anna. Your ex was transferred to the civil registry office. In my opinion, quite logically shrugged the landlady. After all, she lives in the city. And most likely, it is inconvenient for her to go to work in the village. But for me, it's much simpler. She just had a guilty conscience. Her friend declared triumphantly. So what's the matter? Betty grinned. So she has one. And I'll tell you something else. She postponed the wedding because of what happened to the can. But what a noble thing to do, huh? Anna shook her hands. Yes, they are without a stamp in the passport. They have been married for more than a year, and they live together. Not a big sacrifice. Betty suddenly felt incredibly disgusted. It felt like someone had tainted the air in the house. And you know what, Anne? After a little silence, she said, Go away. She was stunned. I don't get it. Are you defending her or something? Well, Betty didn't expect it. I mean, Nick is your brother Nick's brother. Not only am I his sister, but I'm also a woman. And as a woman, I understand Sophia. Maybe it's not love at all. But right now, at this moment, the pig is attracted to this man. Judgment. Who are we? Life will judge us. You go away. Nick kept drinking. Now he was living on the principle that a day had passed and it was all right. That's how it is. The villagers said. What a good family they had, eh? You can't be sure of anything. It seemed that it couldn't get any worse. But the worst was ahead. Nick, a former non-smoker, picked up the habit. And then one day, what Betty had feared would happen. That night, she couldn't sleep. The young woman, as if anticipating trouble, sat on the terrace and sold not cheerful thoughts. And when Betty smelled smoke, she realized with some sixth sense that Nick's house was on fire. She went to the wicket from where the house where her brother lived was clearly visible and made sure that her hunch was correct. Fire. At the top of her voice wailed Betty and skipped to Nick on the move dialing the emergency number. When Betty ran up to her brother's house, the fire was slowly but surely growing. Without thinking, the woman kicked the door open with her foot. She ran into the house, where she got the strength from. She wet a rag and sold into her brother's bedroom and began to shake him. "Wake up, you idiot," screamed Betty. "Is your house on fire?" Sister forcefully pushed Nick and beckoned him toward the exit. The woman realized that every second counted another tug, and they were outside and just in time to fall to the grass. Betty saw the ceiling collapse. Before she lost consciousness, she thought she had made it just in time. People were running from all sides. The house where Nick had been happy for almost 20 years was extinguished quickly. But to restore it required a lot of money, which he didn't have. In fact, it was not even a question of restoration, but almost a full-fledged construction. Nick moved in with his sister. Michael helped them with household chores, planted potatoes, and willingly helped the children to do their homework. The youngest from the bench had a math problem. Nick stopped drinking. The house Betty lived in with her husband and 2 sons wasn't that big. So Nick couldn't help but realize that he had to come up with a place to live. But what could he think of? The village council only shook their hands, for there were no empty houses in the village. One day, Nick heard Michael ask his wife if he was moving at all. If he'd gone on a shift, it would have been good for him. We're not millionaires. He felt bad about embarrassing his sister and brother-in-law. That's why Nick thought it was a good idea. Except there was no money on the phone to go online, Betty. "I hate to ask you for anything, but could you spare some for a poor hobo?" 300. He asked his sister. Nick had been calling himself a hobo lately, either jokingly or seriously. "What's that for?" With suspicion, Betty asked, "And has your brother been drinking?" "Don't worry, you're past that." Nick assured her with a grin. "I want to look for a job ad." "How long do I have to sit on your neck?" "Well, I'll get it for you." A couple days later, he found an ad for shift workers. "When are you leaving?" Betty asked. "In a week." Nick called his daughter before he left. "I'm happy for you," Helen exclaimed. "I've been having all kinds of bad thoughts lately, but thank God you're okay. I should come visit you sometime. What do you think?" "We'll see," the father replied evasively. Nick was ashamed to admit to his daughter that the house where she spent her childhood was no longer there. The ex-wife apparently didn't know anything about it either. After all, Sophia now worked in the city and did not maintain relations with any of the villagers. Thomas and Sophia were 3 days away from getting married. "I can't wait for you to say yes to me in the face of the law," said the happy groom. The future spouses were having lunch at the very cafe where they had met at the hardware meeting. The faces of the bride and groom were shining and the people around them were smiling. "I look at you and directly infect with good mood," said the former to them Lola, head of the Department of Media Relations. "Are you so cool?" "Thank you for your kind words," smiled Parker. The daughter arrived the evening before the wedding of moms. "You could put your face on the cover," Helen exclaimed, kissing her mother. "You look like $1,000,000. "1 million?" Sophia smiled embarrassedly. "Right. Why am I being petty for $1 million? Oh, come on." With a laugh, she waved her daughter away. "You are not hungry." "I could eat an elephant," cheerfully admitted Helen. "But I can't promise an elephant," Sophia hummed. "But fried chicken, and I'll feed you. Come on," encouraged the girl. Almost a year of studenthood. I gave her a lot of fried chicken, but such a delicious Tina, as my mother, has not yet met. I hope the groom appreciated. By the way, where did he appreciate it? Did he appreciate it at the bachelor party now? Mother smiled. He, like you, was not afraid to let go. What about the cake stripper and other bachelor party trappings? You know, not afraid. I don't think our Thomas Stepanovich can be surprised by strippers anymore, or anything else for that matter. I'm very glad I got him for goulash. What about Daddy's sadness? Helen asked. It always seemed to me that you loved each other so much that there is no stronger. It did not seem. The daughter answered Sophia seriously. That's the way it was. But I guess our love just ran out of steam. It happens like that too. But I am grateful to Vanya that he was in my life. By the way, you called him a long time ago. The other day. How is he? He seems to be doing well. He's away on a shift. Oh well, God forbid he's doing well. There's a very nice woman coming, and we'll drink to that. Winked Sophia, the daughter's bachelorette party. Helen smiled understandingly. Or else. Mother and daughter laughed amicably. And then Kate showed up. The bachelorette party was a success. The next day, Thomas and Sophia became husband and wife. Wendy looked at her daughter under her dress with a concentrated frown. One could only wonder what grievances she would express to her new son-in-law. Nick returned from his shift a month later with a lot of money and a great mood. It would be better to solve the problem with housing. The tramp had arrived. He announced his arrival. Fresher, better looking, Sister said approvingly. The work has done you good. Very much so. I'll have to do something about the house. There'll be daylight. There'll be food. The housing problem solved itself. And not just housing. In the morning, Nick went fishing in the neighboring village. The fish pecked and not bad. And Corver learning to cook, which Betty was a great master. But the stars had prepared something more interesting for Nick. He pulled the rod, but it was obviously caught on something. Shit. Nick cursed and bent his lice and fell into the water. He surfaced. And headed for the shore, pulling the fish boat up behind him. Nick was walking through the village, soaking wet, and carrying the bag with a still living fish in it. But there was no cell phone in his pocket. Drowned in the river, and Nick, he heard a woman's voice. What are you doing here? Molly? Nick exclaimed in surprise. Unexpected. Yes, I came to go fishing. In fact, in their meeting, by and large, there was nothing unexpected. He knew that the head teacher had a mother living in the village. And yet, how did you manage to get so far away? Molly asked. The boat overturned. With a smile, he answered. And the former colleagues could not help laughing. That's what the amateur fishermen, said coworkers. And went to my place before the bus is still more than 3 hours. And it is cool outside. And it's comfortable enough. There was no one in the house except Molly. The head teacher gave him a t-shirt and a tracksuit, not forgetting to put the kettle on. I believe your mother lives here too. Nick showed his knowledge. She did, sighed her colleague. Mom died. 9 days yesterday. She came here to sort out her things. But what to do with the house? I don't know. My mom was very sick, and just before she left, she gave me a deed of gift. So they're thinking of selling it or keeping it for Ethan. The guy wanted to get married. At least he'd have a place to bring his wife. Ethan was Molly's son. He was a year older than Helen and went to Polytechnic. Would you let the tramp stay here? Nick asked. What vagrant? The mistress of the house-me. Sadly, he replied. You know probably that I'm having dinner at my sister's, but I'm tired of embarrassing them. Don't worry, I'll pay. Yesterday, I came back from a shift. I made good money, and then I'll find a place to live. What money? Molly waved her hands. You can live, of course, as long as you need. Was it a nice house? A big one with 2 vegetable gardens, a garage, outbuildings, and a nice garden. Nick took good care of the house, for which Molly was very grateful. Another question is who should thank whom? Nick grinned. When the landlady told him to thank you, she took in a hobo. Well, what kind of tramp are you? Molly objected. Just a man in temporary difficulty. She visited the mother house almost every day. Both the residents and the child began to guess what was the matter. A fiancé had shown up. Why are you, Molly, frequenting the village? One day the sales clerk remarked. I wonder if you're going to move there. Who knows? The widow smiled enigmatically. And when the villagers found out who was staying with her, everything fell into place. But Nick made no move to get closer. The coworkers began to speak to each other. But it didn't go any further than that. Molly realized that her lodgers needed time. After all, the man had recently gone through a difficult divorce. It was all settled on Christmas Eve. Molly's back from corporate. Beautiful, dressed up, new haircut. You look good. Approvingly, Nick said. That hair looks really good on you. All the men must have craned their necks. Maybe, she smiled. But it doesn't make any difference to me. And who's going to wring the neck of a drunkard who's old enough to be my son? Well, there is also a physicist, sneered Corver. True, I think so. Doesn't distinguish a man from a woman anymore. Well, you see, Molly waved her hands and laughed merrily. Well, I think that women are always pleased with a man's attention. You like ears, do you? The widow asked quietly, looking Nick in the eye. I love with my heart, he whispered back. The heart of the woman, tired of loneliness, anxiously went down. Did it mean that Nick's heart was not free and it still belonged to Sophia? And yet there was still a tiny hope. The best counselor is the heart, Nick continued, catching her gaze. Now they were looking at each other. Molly suddenly realized she had a chance. Nick nestled against the woman's warm cheek, and he physically felt his heart thaw. And when their lips met, the man realized he was finally cured and ready to start life anew. You are very beautiful, Nick whispered, hardly tearing himself away from her cop. Molly only smiled. She wished if Nick told her that, then things would work out for them. Nick and Molly spent that Christmas alone together. They didn't need anyone. They talked about everything in the world, made plans, and they had the best time of their lives. How you celebrate Christmas is how you spend it, Nick said with a smile, pouring the rest of the champagne. So don't get your hopes up. It's easy to get rid of me, at least for the next year. Outside the window, it was already starting to get matchmaking. And the lovers were thrilled to see not only the coming year together, but also the dawn. Both saw it as a good omen. Could it have been any different on this magical night? I hope it doesn't happen in the next 20 years. Molly said quietly, snuggling into his shoulder. Well, that's a bit pessimistic. Nick stretched out with courtly disappointment. Here's the 30 thing. Molly, well, marry me. I realize I have nothing to offer you yet, but I promise it's only a matter of time. I have grand plans for this year, and shut up, Molly whispered, placing her fingers on his lips. If you were a beggar, I'd still say yes. I'm not a beggar. It's just him. I'm a tramp. My favorite tramp. To us, to our happiness. They drank champagne and went to bed. In the afternoon, a blizzard broke out. Nick shook his head sweetly. Shall we shovel the snow? And why do you want to yawn on a holiday? Asked Molly. My joy. It's only half an hour's work. Then it's gonna snow even more. And then you and I will have a drink. Some wine. Nick went out into the yard and took a shovel, as suddenly he saw how the ambulance, which had left from the side of the cabins, drove into a snowdrift and began to tow frantically. The driver got out of the cab and started looking around nervously. The doctor followed him out, and the men began to gesticulate frantically. Nick picked up a shovel and rushed to the car, which was about 200 meters away. Men. Do you need help? He asked, out of breath. How else? Exclaimed the doctor. There's an elderly woman with a stroke. We can't bring the old lady. The driver got into the car. Nick started shoveling, and the doctor tried to push the car out. Damn this blizzard. He cursed in his monologue with an expletive. The doctor pushed open the door of the patient compartment. Nick peered inside, and his hair stood on end. On the couch lay his ex-mother-in-law. Her mouth was curved to the left. One eye was closed, the other staring blankly into space. A nurse sat next to the older woman. Wendy blurted out to Nick. Do you know her? Asked the doctor. I do, exhaled Corver. And who is she to you? How's that? Do you have any contact with your ex-wife? No, shook his head Nick. I changed my cell phone not too long ago, but also. And the son, spat the doctor contemptuously. Drunk and sneaking around, I think he'll wake up and not remember that his mother was taken to the hospital, and he flatly refused to accompany. I can tell the daughter. It dawned on him the only number Nick remembered by heart. It was Helen's number. Notified, the doctor asked, and Corver suddenly thought he might not be able to reach his daughter. It's Christmas after all. Young people are out. Can I go with her? Unexpectedly, Nick volunteered. Yes, please. The medic shrugged. The driver continued to slip, and the car moved off. Thanks, buddy, shouted the driver Nick, and the doctor asked if he had changed his mind about accompanying the patient. Fortunately, his cell phone was in his pocket. He told Molly what had happened and asked her to go get a shovel. Nick's fears about Helen were justified. He didn't manage to get through to his daughter until the evening. God, what a horror. the girl exclaimed. And Mom is in Thailand with Dad Thomas. They'll be back in a week, but I can come. Come, daughter, but here's the thing, he hesitated. Anyway, I'm living in the village now. What are you doing there? Helen was stunned. Daughter, I'll see you later. Write down the address. After talking to her father, Helen was discouraged. What's so strange, though? Her father was able to find a woman and go to her in the village, and they spent Christmas together. This could only make Helen happy. Dad had found the strength to start a new life. He loves, is loved, and as a consequence, is happy. What more could a daughter want? Yes, but Dad said he was living there. Why not at his place? I'll come and see everything with my own eyes. Dad sounds like he's doing well, and if it's as good as I think it is, it's great. With a positive thought, Helen fell asleep. Helen managed to get a ticket only for January 4. The village was almost no different from her native village. Even the store building looked exactly the same as it had with the baby. The house where Helen's father now lived she found quickly. She knocked on the door not boldly and heard a vaguely familiar female voice. Come in. It's not locked. When the girl entered, she was stunned. Molly. Helen exclaimed in surprise when she saw the head teacher. Yes, Molly, said the woman, embarrassed. That's the way it is. Where's Daddy? Is Daddy coming? There was an awkward pause. And Helen. Nick shouted joyfully and kissed his daughter on both cheeks. Daddy is touched, said the girl, hugging her father. I missed you so much. Me too, Nick admitted. Tears also appeared in the man's eyes. But thank God, you are here. And please come to the table. And yes, guys, let's go to the table. Having coped, finally, with indignation, cordially invited Molly. Dad, Molly, so are you together? With a smile asked Helen. Yes, simply replied Nick. I hope you two are friends. I'm thrilled, assured her daughter. I have 4 parents now, you might say. Sorry, stupid joke. But why? A silly one that doesn't agree with their father's choice. I, for one, am very pleased. After the first glasses were knocked back and the first hunger was removed, Nick and his daughter started talking about everyday life. How's Grandma doing? Helen inquired. Grandma will now need a nurse and a wheelchair. With a sigh, the father replied. But even that's not the point. Sashka and his heroines don't want to take Wendy away. And why? Because they're assholes. Nick cut him off. Besides, Uncle, as you know, always liked to drink. What a sick mother. And if his son doesn't need her, what about his Natasha? What kind of horror stories are you telling? Helen shuddered, and this daughter is not horrors, but the harsh truth of life, philosophically remarked the father. I hope I don't suffer the same fate in my old age. No, of course not. Wendy was conscious and already knew that if it hadn't been for her ex-son-in-law, there was no telling how things would have ended. For 2 days, my ex-mother-in-law barely spoke about me. I mean, he saved my life. And I'm fine. Wendy? Nick smiled, squeezing her hand. The main thing is that you get better. Where's Sophia? Asked the older woman. And tears appeared in her eyes. She doesn't ask about Sasha. A thought crossed my mind. So she realizes that her son doesn't need her. Sophia has gone on vacation. How will she come back? She'll be back. She already knows everything. Really, her son-in-law reassured her. A nurse came into the room and said that the patient needed to rest. Yes, of course, nodded Nick, and walked out. He visited Wendy every day, fed the old lady from a spoon, wiped down Molly's cooking, and ducked out after her without complaint. You're a good man, the ex-mother-in-law said. And Nick smiled involuntarily. If a year ago someone had told Nick that his ex-mother-in-law would say those words, he would have twisted his finger at his temple. What was a year? A week. Nick was pleased to note that Wendy was on the mend. Her speech was no longer so frozen, but her leg paralysis was. As the doctor had assured her, was a matter of time. It was not only the doctor's merit, Molly assured her. A kind word is good for the cat. I think Wendy's quarrelsome nature was a kind of defensive reaction. But I think things are going to change now. Love and kindness works wonders. Hearing these words, Nick remembered what his future spouse had said. It looks like that's the way it's going to be. His Molly is rarely wrong at all. You're a very good man, Wendy repeated. Well, I'm flattered, Nick replied. Sentimental impulses. A few days later, Wendy was discharged. A couple of days before the discharge, Nick called his ex-wife, and Sophia assured him that she would take her mother back to her house. Admittedly, honestly, Corver was dreading this conversation. He himself could not understand the reason for his fear, but the fact remained. When Nick heard the voice of his ex-wife, he was surprised that he was absolutely not excited. They had a very nice conversation, and Nick even told his ex-wife that he would soon get married. Well done, Sophia said approvingly. I hope it's a worthy woman. You bet she is. I know her, the ex-wife inquired. You know, answered Nick with a grin. Molly, the vice principal. Oh, come on. Well, congratulations. You're gonna invite me to the wedding. Well, why not? The former spouses warmly said goodbye, and Nick felt as a mountain fell off his shoulders. Why, I wondered, was he afraid? As Parker gently coaxed his mother-in-law into the car. Wendy, are you comfortable? I'm fine, replied the old woman, and suddenly said, you know what I just thought about, and what is it? Nick, who was sitting in the front seat, asked, that both my sons-in-law are good people. Sonia has good taste after all. Both sons-in-law, as if on command, laughed deafeningly. Molly, who was sitting next to Wendy, also smiled. We try, Thomas said cheerfully and started the car. And waiting for her at home were her daughter, granddaughter, and a holiday dinner. 3 years later, a few days before the defense of the diploma, Helen felt indisposed. Everything pointed to the fact that the future journalist is in an interesting position. When the test showed 2 stripes, Helen cried. What are we crying about? He asked. After all, we wanted to get married. So the 3 of us are going to get married. That's all. Are you really happy? I'm really happy. 4 parents. What did Helen jokingly call them? They were happy too, and Wendy had nothing to talk about. So I'm going to be a great-grandmother, she smiled. Yes, nodded her daughter. Oh my God, I'm going to be a grandmother. That's so exciting. It's like a baby boom, Nick said when he found out he was going to be a grandfather. A year ago, he became a father for the 2nd time. Almost all the money he earned on his regular shift was spent on Echo. And in the end, Nick and Molly became parents to an adorable little dumpling. So the baby-to-be has an aunt who's only 2 years older than him, or a little less. Nick led the eldest daughter to the altar, where the groom was waiting for her and thought what a lucky man he was. And Sophia, Molly, and Thomas were thinking in unison that one should not be afraid of change. Change isn't always a bad thing. They knew that.